Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the head of exhibitions and programs at the George Eastman Museum. Welcome to our third and final virtual artist talk in our Future Present series. Tonight, I'm thrilled to have photographer Jon Henry with us to discuss his recent project, Stranger Fruit, as well as some of his past work documenting athletes. Henry is from Queens, New York, but currently lives in Brooklyn, where he's joining us from today. His work has been exhibited at Aperture Foundation, Smack Mellon, and most recently at Blue Sky Gallery in Portland. In 2019, he was included as one of Lens Culture's emerging artists and has been awarded the Arnold Newman Grant for New Directions in Photographic Portraiture. Recently, he was named one of the Time magazine's Next 100 and was selected as a finalist for the 2021 Aperture Portfolio Prize. If you have questions at any point throughout tonight's talk, please submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. At the end of the program, we'll go through as many of your questions that we have time for. The chat function is open, but we will not be monitoring it for questions. So if you'd like to just drop us a line and say hello, please use the chat function for that. But if you do have any questions, do ask that if you could please use a Q&A button, that'd be great. I'll come back on at the end and we'll go through as many questions as we have time for with Jon. So we are recording today's webinar and we will be putting it on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you'd like to go back and watch again or share with others, you'll be able to access it along with our other webinars and video content through YouTube. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jon Henry.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone from George Eastman Museum, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Definitely an honor and privilege to get to speak about the work and also show kind of what came before Stranger Fruit and how this, seemed almost like 10-year journey has kind of taken shape. So really I wanted to start with this image. This I made in 2011. We're going to go on a pretty linear path as far as, the work that I was making and how it's, progressed over time. But real briefly, after I, left school in 2011, I was, really interested in sports. And, once upon a time was an athlete. I used to play the American majors, basketball, football, baseball. But, I never got to play professionally. But I thought that, something that I would have really loved to do was to photograph sports and to, be on the field shooting. So what I did was I went back to my old high school. I went back to Bayside High School, and I, reached out to them, said, I'm trying to, learn, and I'm trying to grow, and I'm trying to build this portfolio, hopefully to photograph the pros. So I asked them if I could, photograph their season. And I spent pretty much from August until November, from training camp until the end of the season one year, just photographing the players, photographing them practicing, photographing everything in between for the duration of that season. And it was great, just a way to, be on the field and learn and get reps and, make images at the same time. I was interested in athletics, interested in competition, the drive and dedication that it takes, for athletes to do what it is they do. So, this was a great opportunity for me. But of course I was thinking of, branching off and, bigger and better things. The season comes to an end, and the following year, I used those images to help build this portfolio, because I was really interested in getting on the field and photographing pro sports. And, magically, I got in touch with the staff photographer for the New York Mets, and I was able to get my way onto the field. And, this is where I really started making the first images that I was really interested in, spending a season photographing the Mets and then the Jets. It was really cool, being able to, photograph my hometown team. I'm born and raised in Flushing, Queens, so the stadium is literally like 10 minutes away from my home. But, while I'm making these images, over the course of the season, I'm realizing that I'm kind of dissatisfied with the work. Not that I don't like the images, but just I feel that, I know that there's more there. I know that there are more interesting images that can be made. And it really hit me when I was making this image. This was like the last Sunday home game of the season. And, I'm in the pit with, half a dozen other photographers, and this picture was in the paper, and, looked almost exactly like my picture. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't shoot that. Someone else did. But just being there and, everyone taking the same exact photo, that really didn't sit right with me. I knew that there was more there. I knew there were more interesting images to make. So I realized that, photographing sports on field really wasn't for me, but I wanted to, look at what the boundaries were. What else could I do with sports, and what else I could do on the field? So I spent a season photographing the basketball tournament at the Cage at West 4th Street, one of the big basketball tournaments here in the city, along with Rucker, Dykeman, and Gersh. Um, and here, was really transformative for me, because I was really starting to see things unfolding as far as the images I was making, and, just looking at the bodies more critically. I remember this image I made fairly early on in the series. And I remember the second I made it, I looked at it on the computer, and the first thing I thought of was this painting by Jarrett Holt, The Raft of the Medusa. And, something about just the bodies being intertwined, um, and the drama within that. I thought that was really something that was really interesting to me. And that's what I pretty much spent the entire summer photographing, just the interactions of the bodies, uh, trapped, in this sport. So sometimes there would be the object, the basketball, sometimes there would be the hoop, but it was more so a study of the bodies going back and forth. And thinking about the lighting, thinking about framing, thinking about the stage itself. So I think I spent about a year photographing this, and every so often when I have time, I go back and I'll photograph um, the tournament some more. Every summer. Well, across last summer didn't happen, but hopefully this summer I'll be able to go back out there and you know make some more images. But at the time, I was making these images. I was thinking of what the next step could be, and the next step in the process was furthering on this, thinking of the lighting, thinking of the interaction, was taking the athletes out of the arena, off the stage, and putting them in the studio, and lighting them dramatically, and seeing what could come of that. You know, abstracting the sport even further, looking at not just basketball, but also wrestling, and any other sport that I could, isolate um, the athlete from the object. So this was up until these images, recent images were made in like 2004, 2005. Um, so it was a lot of it was this work is really different, obviously, from the work that I began with Stranger Fruit. And Stranger Fruit really began in 2014. I still have a love for working with athletes and looking at how to represent them in a different lens. Um, but I haven't given up on them. But it's just it's a lot to do and a lot going on. Um, so what happened next was I started working on Stranger Fruit, and it started with this image, and the series began in 2014. Um, I photographed this image in the church that I used to work in Flushing, Queens. And at the time, I was unsure of what to create, but the need to create existed. The project Stranger Fruit was created in response to the murders of African American men due to police violence. Now, while I believe while the series began in 2014, the concept really began in 2008. 2008 was the verdict of the Sean Bell murder. Sean Bell was the young man who was murdered by NYPD at his bachelor party in Jamaica, Queens. Again, being born and raised in Queens, I know the area of Jamaica very well, from hanging out there with friends and going to visit family. So I have a intimate knowledge of that neighborhood, but also this really hit home for me. I think I was a year older than Sean when this happened, um, and just everything about it really felt like it could happen to me or my friends. Um, and then the following, so that was 2008 when the verdict came out, and of course I remember the police officers getting off and just what that feeling was revisiting this trauma. The following year, 2009, one of my good friends was getting married, and at his bachelor party, that's all I could think of. We're in the middle of New Jersey, and I'm one of the groomsmen, and all I can think of is, what if this was happening to us? What if this was happening to him? You know, how is the family supposed to move forward when these tragedies happen? When I was obviously thinking of Sean Bell, I was thinking of his fiancee, who we would never get to marry, his daughter, who we would never get to see grow older. But also thinking of the families when these tragedies happen, thinking of the mothers in particular. What are they left with? What are they supposed to? How are they supposed to move forward? So again, between 2008 and 2014, it was a 6-year span of this idea always being in the back of my mind, but not really knowing how to approach it. I knew this was something that I wanted to say something about. It's something that I wanted to address. I just didn't know the route. I didn't know how to navigate that space. And after I made this image in 2014, again, I was left with those questions. Is this a project? Is this a standalone piece? What do we really have here? Um, Again, this being a large departure from what I was working on previously. So that really led me down the road of research. One thing that's always been integral to my process is research, knowing what images are out there, what paintings are out there, what art has come before that can influence the art moving forward. So I started to do research on the Pieta. I realized that this was a pretty natural landing ground for me, from either my background with the church and also just knowing, having a decent history of idea of painting. Um, I started to look at earlier versions of the Pieta, looking at Michelangelo's piece on the left from 1498, and Titian on the right from 1575, and focusing on the Pieta because it's this mother-son connection. The Pieta is the Virgin Mary holding the dead body of Christ, and I thought that was something that was a really a strong statement to make in thinking about these images. This overwhelming feeling of sorrow, grief, which today leading to frustration and anger. But again, I was looking at different versions of the Pieta. These two versions by Andrea Serrano, two vastly different interpretations. And I'm seeing different artists, take their own spin on it. Some more playful, some more serious. But the importance of, artists taking their own spin and making these reconstructions, putting their name on it. But the big breakthrough for the project, I guess when I knew it was a project, or I knew it was something that I had to follow through with, was when I encountered these two works. On the left by Renee Cox, titled Ain't Yo Mama's Pieta from 1996, and on the right by Dr. David Driscoll, titled Behold Thy Son from 1956. And both these pieces really represented a breakthrough for me, thinking of many things. In the image on the left, Renee Cox, the artist, is the mother figure in this scene, and this really got me thinking about the Black body in art, and not just the Black body, but by a Black artist, and the importance of being able to tell your own stories, being able to be the author of what it is that you're narrating. So that was really strong for me, and that's something that I hadn't, fully considered or understood the magnitude of. So this really was an entry into the Black body, thinking of masculinity, identity, vulnerability, and again focusing on that mother-son connection. On the right, the painting "Behold Thy Son" by Dr. David Driscoll. He painted this 1 year after the brutal murder of Emmett Till. He he was so impacted by what he had seen and that whole story with Emmett Till's brutal murder in Mississippi in 1955 that 1 year later he had to paint this. He had to create this work. So there were parallels between the feelings that Dr. David Driscoll had in relation to Emmett Till and my own feelings with Sean Bell. So this is where I knew that this was a project. This was something that I had to follow through with. This is something that I had to work on and investigate over time. And there are a couple of things that were important to me while I'm making the images. I'm thinking of the skin and vulnerability, especially in terms of protection. So all the men, all the boys are shirtless and barefoot. But something else that was really important in the work was the gaze, was the mothers looking directly into the camera and looking into the viewer, making it almost an appeal to the viewer. Um, and again, this also comes from another version of the Pietà, it's going to fall back on research by William A. Bouguereau from 1876. There's something really striking about Mary's eyes where it's hard to encounter the painting, to look at it, and then look away. So I figured that that would be a strategy that I could use to hold the viewer's attention, to keep them rooted in the image, because of the device, because of cell phones, various advertisements, billboards, whatever, we're inundated with imagery. What are strategies that we can use as, artists to keep a viewer's attention longer than it takes to swipe up on Instagram? How do you keep someone's attention for 10 seconds, for a minute, for an hour, for a week, have someone coming back to the same image over and over again? So the mother is looking directly into the camera, looking directly into the viewer, and no expression on their face. I figured that would be a strong strategy to hold the viewer's attention. But, I didn't want the work to be repetitive. The work definitely needed something new. I didn't want the work to feel predictable. So I didn't want it to just be these images of mother and son in the various constructions. So I, looked at the work of Frances Kearney and her series, Five People Thinking the Same Thing from 1998. And this really stood out to me as these portraits of people, but not looking at the camera. So now we're looking at their environment and what it is that they're doing to help us read the image, to figure out what's going on here. And I figured that would be something that would be strong for thinking of the mothers in the project. Thinking of these keywords like absence, isolation, loss, remembrance, hope. Sometimes in the images you can sense that there's another presence that's supposed to be there but is missing. Sometimes not so much. But I also use these images as a connection to the mothers who have lost. How are they supposed to move forward after these tragedies have happened, after they've lost their son, after they've lost their daughter, after they've lost their children for absolutely nothing, murdered by people who are supposed to protect them? Now, we have the images of the mothers and sons, and also the mothers in isolation, but the project was still incomplete. There was still something missing from the work. And for a long time, I really debated on what that was. What was that, final part of the project? And I really didn't know. I didn't know if it was, there needed to be images of maybe the locations where these murders have happened. Maybe there needed to be images of, maybe the sons needed to come back in some type of redemptive way. But you know how not Instagram, Facebook tells you that you've been friends with someone for a year or 2 years or, whatever it is. Um, Nefertiti, who's the mother on the screen right now, while I was in Chicago in 2016, we had made her image the year before in 2015 in the summer. She reposted the image and wrote this amazing poem with it. And that's exactly when I knew that that was the final part of the project. And what she wrote was this: "As I hold my son in my arms, there is nothing strange about him. He is indeed the fruit of my womb, the extension of his father and me, growing, stretching, reaching to the skies. There is nothing strange about him. He is heaven in my eyes, an angel in disguise, handcrafted into a beautiful soul. There is nothing strange about him, for he is the fruit that I have bared, which makes me whole. There is nothing strange about him. He is my son, he is my soul, and he is beautiful." I've read that statement probably a million times since 2016, and it still affects me, every time reading it. Um, but the second I read it, I knew instantly that was the final part of the project. It was the words of the mothers in the series, having them give back and share their feelings on what was going on in the country, what was going on in the project, that helped round everything out. So what I did was I made a questionnaire, like a 5-6 question survey, and after I finished making the image, I'd get back to New York, get the film developed, and you know scan it and finalize the image. I would send the image to them and send them the survey at the same time, so they have it as like a one-to-one, so they can see it together. And this is just a screenshot of some of the responses, but the words are obviously incredibly powerful and stuff that I could never say. Um, on the left, I feel greatly protective and greatly aware of the love and connection I have in my heart and soul for my son. I feel sad that mothers actually have to go through this. My son was able to get up and put back on his clothes. Others, not so much. They are still mentally frozen in that position, that sadness, that brokenness. I feel guilty to be relieved that it's just a picture, because for others it's reality. I feel scared. I feel next. I feel like Tyler could be the next hashtag. And the last one I'll share with you. As I was gradually pulled into the scene and told about the pose, it began to make me think of the daily thoughts I have about my son. I have thoughts of love, change, determination, growth, and encouragement. I also have concerns regarding his health and safety as it relates to the growing conditions across this nation with African American males. There needs to be immediate attention to stop the killing of Black males and suffering of mothers. You know, the texts, excuse me, the images are my words. The artist statement are my words. But having the text from the mothers really rounds everything out and you know gives the project another layer of depth to it. These are real people having these thoughts and having to deal with this on a daily basis, having to worry that when they see the news that this could potentially happen to them or their family or someone closely related to them. So the texts are so important that they do not live as captions. They have to live as their own pieces on the wall. So, we can't speak about the project without speaking about the process. And so the project is shot completely on film. It's all 4x5. That's my camera, Lucy. Um, chilling. We travel all across the country, working on this project. I let the project dictate the device. For the athletes' work, I'm shooting more digital, but for most of my portraits, I'm usually working with film, either 120 or 4x5. Um, but it's important to shoot this 4x5 and shoot this slow, working one sheet at a time. Yes, it's a higher quality and higher resolution, but it's a completely different mode of working. The slower pace, it's different attention to detail. When you're working with a 4x5, you're really working more like a painter and less like a photographer. So that was really important while making the images. Um, also it heightens the importance of everything in the scene because, I travel to these locations and I'm only making, between 2 and 4 photos, and that's really it. So we're making sure that everything in the scene, and, I still make mistakes, but it's important that, everything is building up for this singular moment in the image. And I'm including the frame, around the image just to reinforce this idea that there's no cropping going on. There's very little manipulation in the images at all. Something else that's really important in the work is this idea of performance. And, usually we think of performance as video or dance or acting, but these photos are a performance as well. The mothers in these images have not lost their sons, but they understand the reality that this could happen to them. This could happen to someone in their neighborhood. This could happen to someone in their family. Something else that's really important in the work is the environment. Um, this is not just a New York City issue, which is why I couldn't rest just making images here in the 5 boroughs and in the state of New York. It's important to travel to as many locations as I was able to, and we've been to you know pretty much across the country and back, um, just to show that this is these these murders have happened in the most randomest of areas, and it's a nationwide issue, if not a global issue. So again, really important, showing it from a, big cities to smaller urban areas, indoors, outdoors, different times of day as well. And what's tied to um, doing the scouting in this, because I'm a classic New Yorker. I do not drive. I do not always have an assistant when I'm making the work. Sometimes I just fly into a location and you know we have very limited time with the families. Sometimes it's like an hour, sometimes it's 2 hours. Rarely is it much more than that. So I'm going off of their schedules. Um, but using Google Maps has been, extremely helpful in making the images and just getting an idea for the layout of the land, of what is in the neighborhood that says that this is this location versus somewhere else. Having these indicators in the city. And for the most part, it definitely worked, and definitely helped, um, from the smallest details, making a huge impact. And this is the map where the where the project has gone. This is actually the old map. Um, yeah, I just got back from Utah a few weeks ago, so um, as of right now, the project is finished. Finally, this 7-year journey looks like it has come to a close. As you can see, I've been interested in getting, as many locations as possible and many, various areas as possible. Something else that's really important to the work is the idea of audience. And, you know, if you ask any artist, what their target audience is for the work, they'll probably say, the work is for everybody. The work is for, and I'll probably cop out and say the same thing. Um, but really finding out who the audience is for the work is pretty important um, to one's practice. Um, the work it's fine art, it's documentary, it's performance. Typically that lives in the gallery, it lives in a very specific space. But I didn't want the work to just live in the gallery because only a certain type of person can go to the gallery, can go to the museum. So I've been fortunate enough to share the work in a number of different venues. Been able to share the work in galleries like Aperture Foundation here in 2017, but also sharing the work in spaces like this. This is Minka, which is a holistic healing center here in Brooklyn. And here, this is Hamilton Landmark Galleries in Harlem, which is literally the first floor of a brownstone, which is emptied out so that the community can come and engage with the work. And they have art exhibitions here. Again, a totally different vibe than having to go downtown to Chelsea or go downtown to see it in one of these fancy galleries. And it's just it's really important knowing who the audience is and how to connect that work with them. And here, this is Brick, which is a community center, here in Brooklyn that hosts many events all year round. But I was also fortunate enough to share the work in public spaces through an organization called Art in Ad Places. I was able to display about 6 of these pieces throughout the Fulton Street Mall in phone booths around the neighborhood. And this was great because it was it was public, and you get to have people engage with the work on a more local level. What does it mean to see an image like this in public and at this scale, but also this close, and not be a gallery? How does that change thinking for the people who are viewing it, people who are walking by? Does it make them pause? Does it make them stop? Do they continue? Do they not think about it? And furthering on that, through an organization called 14 by 48, one of my proposals passed, and one of the images was on a billboard near Times Square in 2019. And again, this was amazing, just being able to have it at this scale. And I'm thinking of Felix Gonzalez Torres, and the beds, having that private image in such a public space. And here is almost the same thing. And I'm glad that they didn't put, they had the organization's name, the URL in the bottom right corner, but they didn't have my name, they didn't have the series name, they didn't have the image title on the billboard. And it was just having the public being able to engage with the work, and what that would mean to experience this in a public setting. Obviously we're surrounded by billboards, especially here in New York, surrounded by advertising. Think back, how many times have you encountered a billboard? How many times have you encountered a billboard with, the black body displayed like this? And how many times have you encountered a billboard with a black body where it's not being commodified, where it's not selling you something, where it's not an ad for a movie or, whatever. So, I'd be in trouble if I didn't get to mention Eli Kintz. Eli Kintz is a artist and educator here in Harlem. He's been teaching at FIT. I don't know if he still teaches there. But he wrote this piece called I Remember Daddy. And basically it's a long form poem chronicling the life of the black male from Africa through the Atlantic slave trade, all the way up to his time in America. And while I was, listening to the piece, there was an audio piece that had these visuals as well. Someone was reading the poem. On the screen, there were the visuals of this piece were zooming in and out. And, at first you're looking at it, you're not sure what it is. You think it's like a droplet of water. And then as it zooms out further, you realize that it's a lynched body. And that's kind of where the name of the project, Stranger Fruit, comes from. Of course, there's a song, Strange Fruit, by Billie Holiday. But, it was always the Nina Simone version that I always connected with more. But, I was always thinking of, these lynchings are no longer happening like they were in the antebellum South, like the song Strange Fruit is referencing. But, these bodies are literally being picked off the street. These men, these women, these fruits of the community are literally being, their lives cut short and for absolutely nothing. So, that's where, Stranger Fruit comes from. And yeah, this is the last slide. We did it. We made it. Yeah, we can jump into some questions. I've seen a couple of questions pop up.
Yeah, thank you, Jon. Thanks for sharing with us. And if you want to go back and pull up any images, feel free to do so as we're talking. And I think that last image, I think is actually maybe a good segue into a question that just came in from an anonymous attendee. And Anonymous said, thank you for this talk and sharing your work with us. Your photographs and the words of the women pictured are so powerful. And I'm wondering if you have insight to what the process is like for the children who appear in your photos. Do you have a sense of how the children, especially some who appear to be quite young, understand the project and the meaning behind the photos?
Yeah, it's difficult. For the older children, we can have that discussion. For the younger ones, it's often they're too young to understand what's going on, and that makes complete sense. When Rodney King happened, I was too young to understand the magnitude of what had happened. I understood the video and I understood the importance of the video, but I was just too young to really wrap my mind around everything that was going on. So, as years went by, and there's Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, and then, Sean Bell, that's when it really hit home and I really understood. So I feel like it would be similar for the young children in the project. And that's one of the questions also that I asked the mothers, is how they approach that with their children. And again, it's, the answers are varied as far as, how they do approach that, how they talk about that. Some of them, it's very, basic. For the older, the adolescents, for the young men, those conversations obviously are very different.
Yeah, and there's been a couple questions that have come in that are somewhat similar, so I'm going to kind of blend them together a little bit. So what is the process like for you finding and scheduling the subjects in new places? And can you kind of walk us through the process of when you make one of the mother-son portraits? Do you know the family prior? How long do you spend with them? How do you explain the idea?
Okay, yeah. So most of the families are through, I connect with them through my network, through friends of friends. Early on in the first year when making the images, some of them were friends, some of them were family. But most of the folks in the project I meet through friends of friends in various areas. So like Chicago, like I was just in Utah. That was through, a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, putting through the connection. Some people reach out independently, but like I said, usually it's through the network. And what I do is I email them like a rundown of like, this is what we're looking at. This is how. So I send them like previous images and just a rundown. Like, this is the project. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And this is, basically the rundown of how everything's going to go. So there's nothing that's going to catch them by surprise. Basically, all the images are shot in very close relation to where they live. They're all either right in that neighborhood or where they live and work. So there's a familiarity for them where we're making the image. And time-wise, it just goes basically off of their schedule. Sometimes, some of the families I only have, 20 to 30 minutes with. Some of them we have, an hour, 2 hours, but, it varies, especially when the children are older, because, they may not, live in the same neighborhood. They may be traveling, maybe work, et cetera, and just folks are busy. So and I typically I don't travel to an area until we have a day set aside to make the image. So it takes sometimes a month to 3 months to schedule time to find a day that works best for everyone on their end before I can say that I can go out there to make the image.
How many portraits exist in the series to date, I guess? And then are you still shooting?
There are 59 images combined of everything.
Okay.
So I can't remember the name of, not the name, I can't remember how many families total, but it's a good amount. Yeah, I think it's about 59 images, and then the text pieces on top of that.
Yeah. Hunter has asked, how do you work with the light if you're not shooting during the kind of the best time of days? So I guess, do you use other light sources, or are you always working with available light?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm always using available light, except for the very first image, the first image that I shot in the church. That one I used strobes. That one I used 2 lights on. But everything else had been available light. Just because, one, I wanted to keep it less complicated, and I wanted to make it have this more natural feel. Yeah, shooting in shooting in low light is really difficult with 4x5. If you ever use the camera, you know that you need a lot of light for it. So the images, like the evening scene in LA on Crenshaw Boulevard, that was really difficult because I had to shoot it completely wide open. I had to shoot it 5.6, and I think I shot it like half a second or something like that, or maybe a tenth of a second, something crazy. Thank goodness Mom stayed still, and I know she blinked on one image, so we had to do it again.
I was shocked when you said you only shoot 2 to 4 negatives. That was very impressive.
Yeah, that was one of those images where I kind of wish I had shot 4.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about it until I got in the car, because it was a crazy night, and it just mom was, she was kind of done. She had just gotten there from work, and it was already, it's already such an emotionally charged image and scenario, and then to be out there, just randomly in the middle of the night on Crenshaw Boulevard, it was a little bizarre. So
how long have you been shooting with the 4x5? I'm sorry if I missed that if you said that earlier, but
maybe 8 years now.
Okay, so you were shooting with it before this project started.
Yeah, but not even that much. I think the first thing I shot with it was like the marathon. I shot the New York City Marathon with the 4x5, and then then I made the first image, and then by the time I made the second image, which was like 5 months later, that's when I finally bought it That's when I, bought Lucy, and we've been, making images ever since.
Now, is the image in the church, so the first image, is that considered part of this series, or do you see that just as kind of a catalyst for the series?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the series. It's a very different image, but yeah, that's absolutely, the genesis of the project. Because, again, I made that image, and that was 2014, like in the winter. Like that was like November or so, November, December. And, before I did the second image, I didn't make until like May of 2015. So it was just sitting with this one image for months, just thinking, you know, is this a project? What are we going to do? We have this image. What are we going to do? Is this, how does it grow from here? And, I'm still at the time, still working on Ascension, working on, my sports series, what, where does it go next?
Right. Well, that's a good question. A question that literally just came in, that was, would you ever consider compiling this project into a book? Or how would you find out where the series is how would someone find out where the series is being displayed?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to become a book. That's literally the next step that I'm going to be working on now. Now that the main image making is finished. Right now, that's the game plan to because it's really the only way to really appreciate the texts. Because there's so many beautiful texts, and really the book or a solo show is really the only ways to fully appreciate that. And even in solo shows, you don't always get to see more than a handful of them. So yeah, that's eventually going to happen. Hopefully within the next year it'll be ready, but it's in its infancy right now.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was partly surprised why I asked about the first image in the church, because that was the first time I'd seen that photograph.
Mm.
And from all the exhibition installation views that I've seen, I didn't recall seeing that one, or like viewing stuff on your website and on Instagram. That one hadn't. Maybe I did see it and it just didn't register for me, but it felt like that was the first time that I saw it. So,
Mm.
do you include that in any of the exhibitions that you've done of the work?
Yeah, it's in some of the shows. It's not in any of the shows right now, I don't think. But yeah, I
Sorry.
say again.
I was just gonna say, how does your selection process go for the different, for the different venues? Do you kind of have a set of images that you'd like to work with, or do you kind of just see, how it's?
It depends. Sometimes it depends on the curators. It depends on whatever I use for the submissions. If it's like an open call or something like that, it varies. Some people have seen more images than not, and even on the website right now, I don't have all the images live because I'm getting ready for the book, so I don't want to have all the images up right now. But it's just it depends on the venue, depends on the space, and how many images they're asking for, and then I'll go back and forth with okay, we have these images, do they work? Or so it's a mixed bag. It's kind of difficult to like pin down what the reasoning is behind each selection. Um, but yeah, it was in I had an exhibition at that church
Mm.
last February, literally before the pandemic shut everything down, and that image was definitely in that show because again that's where it was shot, and that was the beginning of um, everything.
Yeah. How has the project? I mean, just over the past year. I mean, how have you been able to continue making and focus? I mean, is that just like an outlet for you of kind of processing?
It's
I mean,
really just
this goes well beyond the past year, but this past year has
yeah.
been,
Yeah, it's really just thinking of there's something that I have to do and I have to get done. Um, really just motivating myself to make sure that I can get out there to get images done, and just being thankful also that I've pressed forward so often to get images. So like beginning of last year, in last January, January 2020, before the pandemic again shut everything down, I was able to get to New Orleans, Houston, and Little Rock in like a 3-day span to photograph 4 families, which was kind of crazy, but it was essential because I needed to get those images done. And again, thankfully, we got them done before the pandemic hit, because of course that pushed everything back. So, it was months later before I could go to, St. Louis, and then Omaha, which was October or December, I think.
Yeah.
And then, Salt Lake City being the most recent one just a couple weeks ago. So yeah, it's put a monkey wrench as far as, planning, but it's just something that, I still have to do, still had to get out there, and, it's already come so far and it's so close that it's just the next, the natural next step is just to keep working and keep making it happen.
Yeah. So I think we've got just a time for maybe one more question. Aaron asked, do you foresee yourself photographing mothers who have lost their children to police violence? And how would that affect the performance aspect of your process?
No, those families have already been through so much that I don't really want to, that I think that would be a different project. Um, I had the opportunity to speak with Lucy McBath a few years ago. She's, and I keep forgetting, she's running, was she's running for like governor or something like that, or in somewhere in like Georgia. But she's the mother of Jordan Davis, who was murdered in Jacksonville for having his music too loud in this car. Crazy, but just like talking with her for like, just a minute, 5 minutes, I realized like, photographing the mothers who have lost, it's a completely different project. They've already have to deal with so much, and, so much of this is, going through trauma, and it just wouldn't be the same. And, I guess the crux of the project of Stranger Fruit is that, these mothers have not had that firsthand experience. I mean, they've had, obviously everyone's had to experience, this, their police stories in one way or another, but never had to experience this death or this murder, firsthand. And, using that as the connective thread that, this could happen to anyone, this could happen to any one of us, is a different project, having that, and then, photographing mothers who have lost.
Well, Jon, thank you again so much for sharing with us today. It's really incredibly powerful work, and I've personally really enjoyed. I mean, as much as one can enjoy it, but I love your work. I love seeing. I love following along on Instagram and watching the project evolve. I'm really excited to see the book. Do you have any idea of a publishing date when we might be able to?
Not yet.
No.
Hopefully soon I'll have that information, but it's still a work in progress. I've just been like overloaded and not really even had time to gather my thoughts yet to finish the book dummy.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'll have the book dummy done in like, in a couple days, and then, the conversations will continue. But soon, everyone will know soon.
Yeah, let us know, and we'll want to push it out for you, get it out there in the world. So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And again, my apologies for the slight delay there in the beginning. This concludes our Future Present series for the year. We will be starting it again, hopefully again next spring, with a new group of artists. And hopefully this will be a yearly program for us as we move forward. Thanks again, Jon. Everyone have a wonderful evening and a good coming weekend.